As I've mentioned a few times before over the course, a recipe relies on two different things to make it delicious. The one is the ingredients you use, and obviously ingredients are very important, but you can get a lot of recipes that have the same ingredients, and the method is actually what really creates the best flavor. So when you're cooking meat, you can use the best steak you can find, but if you cook it badly, you're going to lose out on all that delicious flavor. In this lecture, I'm going to teach you how to get the best flavor out of your meat, and the main thing is the color. So I'm going to teach you how to color meat brilliantly. And when I say color, I don't mean whether it's pink or brown. I mean whether you're getting that good, crispy, dark brown on the outside of the meat and whether it's still nice and pink on the inside. I'm going to kick off this demo with a lamb chop. And you have to remember everything that I show you with a lamb chop, you can do with a beef steak or a pork rib or anything else. It's just that the lamb in South Africa happens to be really nice and it's a very popular thing to put on the barbecue or braai. So the first thing you're going to see is that there's a big layer of fat. Now, if you're going to have your steak medium rare, you're not actually going to have enough time to cook all of this fat through. So you almost have to cook it before you start cooking your steak on either side. So the first thing we're going to do is put it fat side down on the grill. Sometimes they don't stand up on their backs. So a nice little trick is to stand them all next to each other, like that, and actually stick a skewer through them. And it's just one tiny hole, so it's not going to let all the juices run out. And then to put another one through this fat to keep them all uniform. So now when you're on the braai, you can actually turn them all at once. And then the next thing, to get some really, really good color, we're going to put a whole lot of salt on the skin. Now you can salt fat as much as you like because most of the salt's going to actually come off while you're cooking. Another way to do this is to take the salt and put it on the surface and then dab your steak or whatever you're cooking onto the salt. So you can see there's a good generous layer of salt there. So we're going to cook these in a griddle pan. You can do it in a heavy base frying pan as well if you like. And the main thing to remember is that you're only ever going to put salt on your fat. You never put a rub or a flavoring on the fat because the fat is the part of the meat that's going to cook for the longest. So if you imagine it like this, all the spices and herbs are going to go nice and black and crispy on the sides of the meat. But if you're going to cook the fat for twice as long, that rub is going to go completely black by the time the sides have cooked properly. Anyway, so we're going to cook them fat side down just to crisp up the fat, then we're going to take them off the skewer and dab them in a rub. So get your griddle pan nice and hot, and while that's heating up, I'm going to make a quick rub. Now the rub I'm going to make is not the only rub you can have with lamb. I'm just putting it in because I think it's a really nice recipe, but you can put whatever you like on your lamb. It's just a nice alternative to the standard braai salt and a squeeze of lemon. This is a recipe for a spice rub called za'atar, which is from Lebanon, but I bet you every country in the Middle East will argue that it came from their country. And I have family that grew up in Lebanon, so this is the old family recipe. Start off, I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons of oregano, 2 tablespoons of marjoram, and 1 tablespoon of dried thyme into a little spice grinder. You don't have to grind it up. I quite like it because it creates a really nice rub. Okay, pop that into a bowl. I'm going to put in about 1 teaspoon of coarse salt. That's big chunks. They're going to get ground down nice and fine. Maybe even a little bit more. About 1 tablespoon of sumac. So sumac is one of the few dry ingredients you can use to add acidity. It's got like a sour, fruity flavor to it. And this is going to give the za'atar like a sour rub flavor, which is very nice. Then we've got our sumac salt. So that's our base. And then finally we're going to add through our sesame seeds. Now sesame seeds are important. When they are raw, they are actually quite bitter. But I'm going to add these in raw because they're going to be cooked in the rub. And if you toast them and then use them in the rub and re-seal them on the outside of a piece of meat, they're actually going to go black and even more bitter. But if you were going to use this as a dip for something, I would recommend toasting the seeds in advance. So we're just going to pop in about 2 tablespoons. And then just give them a good mix. Okay, now I've got my rub here, the griddle pan's hot, so I'm going to teach you how to grill the meat now. So you always go fat side down, because remember we haven't put our rub on. So I'm going to plonk these on and just let that tick away. And the meat's going to curl a little bit, so you want to just keep pushing it down in certain areas so you can be sure that there's part of the fat that's actually touching the griddle pan. So the griddle pan's on a sort of medium-high heat, And you can see I've got beautiful crispy fat here, but the meat is completely raw in the middle. And if you flip it over, I've just colored the other side slightly, so all the fat's on the bottom is crisped up. Now we're going to transfer these somewhere and take them off the skewers. There's some nice fat left behind the griddle pan, and we're going to use that to brown the other side of the meat shortly. So how do we put the rub on our meat? Take whatever rub you've got, in this case my delicious family recipe za'atar. You sprinkle it out in a tray. And to make sure you get a good coating, you take your lamb chop and push it down side on. Now remember, you don't want the fat to burn, and you don't want any bitter flavors on the fat, so you're going to try and keep them away from the rub as much as you can and just get the sides nice and rubbed up. We've got really good crispy fat, and we've got the rub on each side, and our griddle pan's still smoking hot with all that delicious lamb fat, and now I'm going to put them rub side down into the fat. And you can see how the sesame seeds have toasted and they're sizzling away in all that lamb fat. So my chops have been cooking for about 4 minutes on each side, and if you have a look, they're really, really nice and dark. And the key to that is a hot pan and no moisture on the outside of the meat. As soon as you've got water or blood on the outside, it's just going to cook in its own juices. And I'll show you an example of that just now. But these are perfect. And the fat stayed nice and crispy, the rub's got it nice and dark. Fantastic. Final step is just to let the meat rest for a few minutes. You can see here when it rests, it releases a bit of its blood onto the platter. So we're going to put it onto a nice clean plate. So when people are trying to get a perfect steak, what they don't realize is you need to use a hot pan to start with, and your meat has to be dry. So this is what happens when you do a steak wrong. You don't let your pan get hot, you light it, and you put the steak in the pan immediately. And you can see this has come out of a vac bag or something, and there's all this excess water on the steak. That's the last thing you want. And you can see here, that is boiling, not sizzling. So this means the steak is just letting all of its juice into the pan. And that's because it went into a cold pan. Another mistake people make is turning the steak too often. So now we've got it nice and grey and pale on that side, looking absolutely unappetizing. And we're going to just boil it in its own juices on the other side for a bit too. So how do you think the lamb chop compares to that beautiful steak? That's the trick to a perfect lamb chop. Now with these za'atar lamb chops, I'm just going to serve some lime and coriander yogurt. About a cup of double thick Greek yogurt, the zest of a lime, and the juice. Tiny clove of garlic. I probably won't even put all of it in. I don't want it too garlicky. A little bit of salt in there. Do our little paste. Some herbs. We've got a good handful of coriander and a good handful of parsley here. So we're going to pull the stalks out, give it a good chop. And then a good dollop of olive oil and a good stir. A crack of pepper, a little bit of salt. You can spend time chopping all the herbs, but if you want the flavors infused as fast as possible, best option is to use the stick blender. So you just take all of those ingredients, put them together. And there's your green yogurt for your lamb chops. So remember, the secret to crispy fat is dry meat and a very hot pan.